Please don't take my home, she begged. The rancher froze. Then Saeed, be my wife instead. The air between them trembled, like the moment before thunder breaks. Her voice was soft, trembling, yet fierce enough to bruise the silence. Please don't take my home, she whispered. The word struck him harder than any bullet he'd ever fired. The sun burned above, fierce and merciless, casting long shadows over the dry land where everything seemed to be dying, except her will. Maren Holt knelt in the dirt, her red dress dulled by dust, clutching a folded paper that had once been her father's pride. Her hair clung to her cheeks, wind-tangled, her lips trembling not from fear but fury. Across from her, Reed Callan stood like a statue carved from drought and grief, broad-shouldered, coat dusted with trail miles, a revolver hanging loose in his hand. The town sheriff shifted awkwardly behind him, waiting for the new owner to claim what was rightfully his. The crowd outside the old wooden courthouse had thinned, but not the silence. Reed hadn't planned to see her. He hadn't known the previous deed holder was a woman, let alone one still living on the land. He'd bought the Holt Ranch at auction, cheap, another parcel added to the Callan spread. But now, looking at her kneeling in front of him, dust streaking her tear-marked face, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Shame. You're trespassing now. Ma'am, the sheriff said, adjusting his hat. She ignored him. Her voice cracked through the air like dry lightning. My father built that house with his hands. He's buried under that tree behind it. You can buy the dirt, Mr. Callan, but you can't buy that. Reed's jaw flexed. His whole life had been trade. Land for cattle, gold for grain, silence for peace. But there was something in her tone that refused to be bargained with. He should have walked away, signed the last paper, let the sheriff do his job. But the longer he looked at her, the harder it became to breathe. The wind picked up, tugging her dress, scattering loose straw from the wagon wheels. He saw the desperation behind her eyes, not the kind that begged for mercy, but the kind that burned to stay alive. Then came that pause, the kind of silence that could change everything. Reed holstered his revolver slowly, staring down at her. If you want to keep the land, he said, his voice rough as gravel, then be my wife instead. The sheriff coughed in disbelief. A woman on the porch gasped. Somewhere a horse whinnied. Maren blinked up at him, stunned. Her laugh came sharp and dry. Is that how you fix your fences, Mr. Callan? With wives? He didn't smile. With promises that hold. She rose to her feet, brushing dust from her palms, her chin lifted like a challenge. You don't even know me. I know enough, he said. You won't survive another week out there alone. I've survived plenty, she shot back. What I won't survive is being owned. You'd still have your home, he replied, his voice low, steady, almost gentle. And your name stays on it. Just a line on paper, not a chain. Her throat tightened. She wanted to hate him for even saying it, for thinking marriage could be traded like property. But the truth pressed hard against her ribs. The bank would evict her by sundown. The house would be burned, her mother's grave unguarded. The sheriff had already nailed the notice to her door. She turned her face away, swallowing the storm in her chest. You don't know what you're asking. Maybe not, he admitted. But I know what I'm offering. Shelter, respect, and a way to stop kneeling in the dirt. Something broke in her eyes. Something she'd held for too long. Pride, grief, fear. They tangled together until her voice came out quiet but sure. Fine, she said. I'll marry you. But understand this, I stay on my land. I make my own choices, and if you ever try to take that from me, I'll burn the house myself. He nodded once. Then we understand each other. The sheriff looked like he wanted to melt into the ground. Well, guess I'll fetch the judge. By sunset, the papers were signed inside the old mayor's office. No music, no kiss, no flowers, just ink and silence. The judge mumbled through the vows. Neither of them looked away from the window. When it was done, she walked out first, her boots clicking hard against the floorboards, the last light of the day painting her hair in copper. Outside, the air had cooled. The wind smelled faintly of sage and old wood smoke. Reed followed her to where her mare waited by the hitching post. He wanted to speak, to say something that would make it less cruel, less strange. But she mounted without a word. I'll have the papers brought tomorrow, he said quietly. I don't need your paper, he nodded. Maybe not, but I'll send them anyway. She turned the horse, her silhouette outlined against the dying sun. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then she said, "You can own every acre in this county, Mr. Callan, but you'll never own me," and she rode away. That night her small ranch lay still beneath the wide sky. The boards creaked in the wind, the oil lamp flickered weakly, and the grave under the pear tree glowed faintly in moonlight. Marin sat at the table with her father's old coffee tin beside her, filled with the last coins she had left. She stared at the marriage paper, the ink still wet, her signature beside his. Her chest ached, not from regret, at least not yet, but from the weight of all she had done to keep a place in this world. She whispered into the stillness, "I kept it, Papa. I kept it." Outside, a horse stopped near the fence line. She looked out through the curtain and saw him, Reed, leaning from the saddle, hammering something into the post. She stepped out barefoot, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. He turned when he heard her. Moonlight struck his face, dust, stubble, eyes dark as turned soil. "Didn't mean to wake you," he said. "What are you doing?" He pointed at the sign. It read, Holt Callan Ranch. 2 names carved into one plank of wood. "It's your land," he said. "I just wanted folks to stop saying otherwise." She looked at him for a long moment, the anger softening slightly, confusion taking its place. "You don't owe me that." "I know." He started to leave, but she stopped him. "Why did you do it?" He didn't turn back right away. When he did, his voice was quiet, almost broken. "Because I've taken too much in my life. This one thing I'd like to give." He rode off without waiting for her answer. Marin stood there, wind tugging at her hair, the moon painting silver across the fields. The house behind her groaned like it remembered better days. Inside, the ink on the paper gleamed faintly beside the lantern. She should have felt trapped. Instead, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Uncertainty. A flicker of something that wasn't hate. The night carried his voice back to her, faint but clear in the distance. "I'll come by tomorrow to fix your fence." She pressed her lips together, unsure whether to cry or curse. "Do what you want, Callan," she whispered into the dark. But when the wind shifted, her heart betrayed her. It hoped he would. The morning broke cold, a thin sheet of frost silvering the ground outside Marin's cabin. The horizon bled pale light over the valley, catching the empty corral and the roof's sagging edge. She moved quietly through the house, her red dress replaced by a plain linen shift, her hands rough from the night's work. The air smelled of burnt coffee and sawdust. On the table lay the marriage document, folded and smudged at the corners as if she'd tried to erase it in her sleep. A knock came. 3 slow raps. She froze. For a moment she hoped it was the wind, but it wasn't. The sound came again, patient but firm. Marin opened the door and there he was. Reed Callan stood with his hat in hand, coat dusted with frost, eyes steady as if he'd been waiting hours for her to answer. Behind him, 2 horses waited, one hitched to a wagon stacked with tools and wood planks. "I said I'd fix the fence," he murmured. She crossed her arms. "And I said you could do what you want." "Then I'm doing that." He stepped past her without asking, boots heavy on the porch boards. She wanted to protest, but the words tangled in her throat. Something about the way he moved, quiet, deliberate, never flinching, made it hard to stay angry. He carried the scent of tobacco and cold air, of someone who lived outside more than in. By noon, the hammering echoed across the yard. Marin worked in silence nearby, feeding chickens, mending a saddle strap, pretending not to look. But she watched. Every movement of his arm was precise, every strike purposeful. He worked like a man trying to make peace with the land itself. When the sun reached its peak, she brought out a jug of water. He was driving the last nail into the fence post when she set it beside him. He looked up, sweat glistening on his temple. "Didn't have to," he said. "I know." She turned to leave, but he caught her voice again. "You got a stovepipe that's bent," he said. "Smoke's backing into the chimney. I can fix it." "Sure," he said, wiping his brow. "But I already bought the iron. Would be ashamed to waste it." She glanced at him, her jaw tightening. "You always talk in bargains?" He met her gaze evenly. "No, just don't like seeing something break when it can be fixed." That night she didn't light a lamp. The stars stretched endless over the hills, and she sat by the window watching the faint glow from the distant ranch house, his home. The paper said they shared a name now, but it didn't feel real. They hadn't spoken of vows or promises, hadn't touched since that day in the dust. Yet something in the quiet had changed. The next morning she woke to the sound of hooves. Reed had returned, this time leading a cart filled with lumber. He didn't wait for her permission. He simply began patching the roof. "You can't keep doing this," she said, stepping out onto the porch, voice sharp. "Doing what?" "Coming here like you belong." He looked down from the roof, nails between his teeth. "Legally I do." She hated how calmly he said it. "You think paper makes a home?" "No," he said, driving another nail. "But people do." She turned away, heart hammering. The nerve of him, so steady, so sure. And yet, when the wind picked up, and she saw the torn shingles flapping like broken wings, she didn't tell him to stop. Days passed that way, him repairing what was broken, her pretending not to care. By the week's end, the fence stood straight, the roof sealed, and the house no longer moaned when the wind pressed against it. But the silence between them remained heavy, like air before a storm. One afternoon she found him by the old well. He had stripped to his undershirt, sleeves rolled, hands dark with dirt. The sun caught in his hair and the muscles in his arms flexed as he dug deeper into the ground. "What are you doing now?" she asked, exasperated. "Digging you clean water," he said simply. "I didn't ask for that." He didn't look up. Didn't have to. The shovel struck rock. Sparks flew from the metal. Maren stood there a while, arms crossed, watching him swing again and again. He wasn't doing it for show. There was something fierce and quiet in the rhythm of his work. As the hours passed, she brought him a cup of water. When he took it, his fingers brushed hers, rough and warm. For a breath, neither moved. Her pulse jumped. She turned quickly, walking away before he could speak. That evening, clouds rolled in thick and dark from the west. The air grew heavy, humming with coming rain. Maren was inside, pulling the last of the laundry from the line, when a crack of thunder split the sky. Then the storm came. The wind screamed against the windows, slamming shutters, tearing branches from the lone pear tree by her father's grave. Rain hammered the roof. She rushed outside, trying to tie down the barn doors, her dress soaked in seconds. "Damn it," she muttered, fighting the rope. Her hands slipped. The wind tore the knot free. Then suddenly he was there. Reed burst from the shadows, grabbing the swinging door before it could rip off the hinge. "You're out of your mind!" he shouted over the storm. "You shouldn't be here!" She yelled back, but her voice broke as lightning flashed between them. He tightened the rope, pulled her inside. The storm roared around them. Rain dripped from his hat brim, sliding down his jaw. She stood inches away, chest heaving, water glistening on her skin. The world outside was chaos. Inside, everything slowed to a heartbeat. "Why do you care?" she asked, voice barely above the wind. He stared at her like he wanted to find the words, but couldn't. "Because I can't not." For a long moment, neither moved. The thunder rolled above, low and distant, and in the dim lantern light, she could see something raw in his eyes, something not born of pity, but recognition. When the worst of the storm passed, they sat by the hearth, the fire sputtering weakly. Maren's hair clung to her face, her hands trembling as she tried to warm them. Reed poured her a cup of coffee, black and bitter, but it steadied her. "You should go," she said after a while. "I will," he replied softly, "when I'm sure the roof holds. You've done enough." "Maybe not," he said, staring into the fire. "You think I married you to take what was yours. But I did it to stop something I've seen too many times, good people losing what they bled for." She looked at him then, really looked. The shadows under his eyes, the scar at his temple, the quiet exhaustion of a man who carried too much. "You don't know me, Callan. I know you'd rather fight the wind than ask for help," he said. "And I know you've been doing that too long." She didn't answer. The fire cracked between them. Somewhere outside, the rain softened into mist, and the night grew still again. When she finally rose to go to bed, he stood. "I'll sleep in the barn," he said. "You don't need to." "I know," he murmured. "But I will." He tipped his hat slightly before stepping out into the night. Maren stood there long after the door shut, the warmth of the fire brushing her face. She touched her hand to her chest where her heart still thudded too hard, too fast. She didn't know if it was anger or something far more dangerous. Outside, she heard him settle in the barn, the quiet thump of hay and the faint creak of wood as he lay down. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered. She whispered into the darkness, almost a confession. "You're supposed to be my mistake, not my shelter." The wind carried the words away, and the only answer was the steady sound of rain dripping from the eaves. The sun rose pale and cold after the storm, painting the ranch in silver light. Mist clung to the fields and the world felt rinsed clean, though nothing between them had been. Maren woke to the smell of wet earth and smoke. The fire in the hearth had burned low. She wrapped a shawl over her shoulders and stepped outside, the boards cool under her bare feet. The air was still. The barn door stood open. Inside, she found Reed asleep against a stack of hay, his coat draped over him, hat tipped low. For a moment she just watched him. The lines on his face softened in sleep, the steadiness of his breath. It almost made her forget the sharp edges of everything between them. Almost. She turned quietly and walked back toward the house, forcing her thoughts toward the chores that couldn't wait. By noon, the yard was alive with sound again. Chickens clucked, the wind rattled the fence gate, and the creek behind the pear tree ran full for the first time in months. Reed was already up, splitting firewood by the well, sleeves rolled, sweat glinting on his forearms. He didn't speak when she passed him, and she didn't either. But the silence felt different now. Not angry, not cold, just heavy with things unsaid. Later that afternoon, she found a letter wedged beneath the door. The envelope was crisp, sealed with wax. It bore the county clerk's stamp. Maren frowned and tore it open, expecting another tax notice. Instead, she found the words that would shatter what little peace had taken root. It was a copy of a contract, dated weeks before their marriage. Her name was there, written by another hand beside Reed's. It spoke of an agreement to merge property lines, to settle disputes through a marital arrangement. No obligation of cohabitation. Dissolution permissible after 1 year, her breath caught. The paper trembled in her hands. She sank onto the chair, reading the lines again and again until the words blurred. The fire crackled behind her, mocking in its warmth. So that was what she had been. A solution. A convenience in a border dispute. The sound of boots on the porch pulled her upright. She folded the paper quickly, shoving it beneath a stack of ledgers. Reed stepped inside, dust on his coat, a coil of rope slung over his shoulder. "Morning ride to the south field," he said. "Fence held through the storm. Thought you'd want to know." She didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on him, but her voice stayed low, tight. "You should have told me," he paused. "Told you what?" She pulled the folded letter from beneath the ledgers and threw it onto the table. The wax seal broke open. "This," she said. "That all of this, me, the marriage, the land, was a deal drawn up in an office. That I was just part of your map." He stared at the paper, the color draining from his face. "Where did you—" "It doesn't matter where I found it. You signed it, didn't you?" He exhaled slowly, shoulders tensing. "I did, but not like you think." Her laugh came bitter. "Not like I think? Reed, it says you could dissolve it after a year. No obligation of living together. No obligation of anything at all. You made me your boundary line." "It started that way," he said quietly, stepping closer. "But it didn't stay that way." She stepped back. "You had every chance to tell me. Every time you came here, every time you fixed something, every time you looked at me like I meant something, you could have told me the truth. I thought I was protecting you," he said. "From what? Honesty?" His jaw clenched. "From walking away before I had the chance to make it real." She shook her head, fury and heartbreak twisting together. "You think that's how you make something real, by lying about how it began? I think sometimes things start wrong and still end right," he said, his voice rough, eyes steady on hers. "I didn't know you then, Maren. I didn't know what kind of woman you were. But I do now, and I'd marry you again even if it cost me every acre I own." "Don't say that," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "You don't get to say that." He took another step forward, the floor creaking beneath his boots. "You asked me once why I cared. That's why. Because somewhere between that paper and this house I stopped thinking about land. I started thinking about you." She turned away, voice breaking. "You should have told me before I started believing it. Maren." She slammed her palm against the door. "Go, just go," he didn't argue. He stood there for a heartbeat longer, as if memorizing her face, then set his hat back on and stepped out into the wind. The door shut softly behind him, but the sound hit her like a gunshot. The moment he was gone, the air collapsed. She pressed her hands against the table, breathing hard, tears spilling freely now. Her reflection in the window looked like a stranger, eyes red, shoulders trembling. She hated that she still wanted to run after him. Instead, she packed. She took only what she could carry: the photograph of her parents, her father's worn notebook, the folded deed. Though now it meant nothing. The rain had returned, soft at first, then steady, tapping against the roof like a heartbeat. By the time Reed returned to his own ranch, he realized what she'd done. Her horse was gone from the stable, the lanterns unlit. The fence sign he'd carved, Holt Callan Ranch, hung crooked, one side ripped loose by the wind. He knew before he even reached the cabin that she was gone. He searched through the night. He followed the trail through the valley, through the rain-slick paths where the mud swallowed hoofprints. Lightning cracked the sky, white and violent, but he kept riding, his coat soaked through, his breath harsh. At the river crossing, he found her tracks again, small, uncertain, veering toward the old trail that led into the canyon. "Marin!" he shouted into the storm. The wind carried his voice away. He dismounted, pulling the reins tight, scanning the shadows. "Marin, please, no answer." Only the river's roar and the thunder overhead. He found her horse an hour later, tethered beneath a cottonwood, trembling from the cold. He followed on foot, boots sinking in the mud. When he saw her at last, she was sitting on a flat rock near the riverbank, soaked to the bone, clutching something to her chest. He approached slowly, his breath catching when he realized what she held. The deed. The paper was torn, half wet, ink bleeding into nothing. "Marin," he said softly. She didn't look up. "You should have let me be." "I couldn't," he said. "You lied to me." "I know." "Then why are you here?" "Because I can't stand knowing I hurt you." He knelt beside her, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead. "Because I didn't marry you for the land, not anymore. I married you because when you looked at me, you made me want to be better than I've ever been." Her eyes lifted, glistening under the gray sky. "You should have said that before the papers did," he swallowed hard. "I'm saying it now." The river surged behind them, the storm raging on. She turned away, the deed crumpling in her fist. "Go home, Reed, I don't belong there." He reached for her hand but stopped halfway. "Then I'll stay here." "Don't," she whispered. "I mean it," he said. "I'll stay as long as it takes for you to believe me." She looked at him then, mud-streaked, drenched, eyes burning with a quiet kind of devotion that hurt to see. She shook her head, rising slowly to her feet. "You can't fix this like a fence." "Maybe not," he said, standing too. "But I'll still try." She turned away into the rain. "You'll freeze out here." "So will you," he replied. For a long, endless moment, they stood facing each other, neither moving, rain washing everything clean but leaving the ache behind. Finally, she said, her voice barely audible, "You should have let the land go." He answered without hesitation. "I wasn't saving land, Marin. I was saving the only thing that made it worth having." Her lips parted, but no sound came. She looked at him once more, then stepped back, her figure blurring through the curtain of rain until she vanished into the dark. He didn't follow. Not yet. But when dawn came and the rain stopped, he would ride again, because some storms he knew weren't meant to be escaped. They were meant to be endured. The storm broke just before dawn, leaving the sky bruised and streaked with silver. The world smelled of mud and smoke, the kind of air that carried both ending and beginning. Reed rode through it with his coat pulled tight, his horse breathing steam into the cold. The trail cut through hills slick with rain, and the sound of hooves echoed like heartbeats in the fog. He hadn't slept, hadn't stopped searching. Every time he thought he saw her in the distance, a shadow, a flash of red cloth, the mist swallowed her whole. By the time he reached the upper ridge, the first light touched the valley below. That's when he saw it, a thin column of smoke rising from the old hunting cabin near the river bend. Relief and dread hit him all at once. He spurred the horse forward, mud splattering up his legs, his jaw set tight. When he reached the cabin, he dismounted before the horse even stopped moving. The door creaked open at his touch. Inside, the air was cold despite the weak fire struggling in the hearth. She was there, wrapped in a blanket, knees drawn to her chest. Her hair was damp, her face pale and raw from the rain. She didn't look up when he entered. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly, voice hoarse. He closed the door behind him, leaning his hat on the table. "And you shouldn't be here alone. I didn't ask you to come." "I know," he said. "But I came anyway." She stared into the fire, eyes hollow, her fingers clutching her father's old notebook. "I didn't think it would snow," she murmured. Outside, flakes had begun to fall again, slow and heavy, blanketing the earth in silence. He crouched near the fire, feeding it another log. "You lied to me," she said finally, her voice breaking on the edge of anger and something softer. "I did," he answered. and I hate myself for it. Then why not leave me alone? Because you're freezing, he said, glancing at her shivering hands. Because if I walk out that door, I'll never stop seeing you like this. She swallowed hard, eyes still on the flames. You don't get to feel guilty, Reed. You got what you wanted. I never wanted to hurt you. Then what did you want? He hesitated, his voice low. To give you something back. A home, a chance, a life that didn't have to end in loss. Her laugh came sharp and hollow. You can't give what was never yours to give. Maybe not, he said quietly, sitting down across from her. But I can try to earn it. The fire crackled, filling the silence between them. The storm outside thickened. Snow drifted against the window pane. He pulled off his coat and laid it near her feet. She didn't move at first, but when the shivering became too much, she reached for it, wrapping it around her shoulders. The warmth hit her slowly, sinking into her bones. He leaned back against the wall, watching her from across the flickering firelight. You always do that, he said after a long while. Do what? Pretend you don't need saving even when you're half broken. Her eyes lifted, tired and wary. Because needing someone never worked out well for me. It could this time. She shook her head. You say that like you can promise it. I can't, he admitted. But I can stay until the storm's over. For the first time, her eyes softened. She looked at him fully now, taking in the weariness, the mud on his boots, the raw sincerity etched into his face. He looked like a man who'd been chasing ghosts and found something worse. Truth. You came all this way, she whispered. Yes. In the snow. He smiled faintly. You're not easy to forget. The words hung in the air, fragile as the snowflakes gathering on the windowsill. She turned her gaze back to the fire, her fingers tracing the edges of the notebook. I wanted to feel like I was still his daughter, she said softly. Not just someone's contract, Reed's voice was gentle. You are. You always will be. The wind howled outside, pressing against the walls like an old sorrow. Hours passed, the fire burning low, the world wrapped in white. She didn't ask him to come closer, but when she shifted in her sleep, he moved quietly to drape another blanket over her shoulders. He sat nearby, his back to the wall, eyes never leaving her face. When morning came, the world outside glowed gold under the first light of sun. Snow shimmered over every field and ridge, untouched, endless. Marin stirred, blinking slowly, the warmth of his coat still wrapped around her. When she turned, she saw him lying on the floor beside her, one arm resting lightly across her waist. His breathing was deep and even, the hard lines of his face softened in peace. For a long moment, she simply watched him. There was something terrifying and beautiful about the way he slept there, like a man who had stopped running. She lifted her hand, hesitating before brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. His eyes opened halfway, calm and unreadable. I don't want the land anymore, she said quietly. He sat up slowly, his gaze steady on hers. What do you want then? Her voice trembled, but it didn't break. What grows on it? With you. The silence that followed felt like the world holding its breath. Then he smiled, small but real, the kind that reached his eyes. Then let's go home. By noon, they were back in the valley. The snow had begun to melt in places, dripping from fences, soaking into the earth. Marin walked beside him through the yard, their footsteps crunching in the frost. Her house stood where it always had, stubborn and waiting. That night, she carried a single box from her father's home to Reed's ranch. The next day, another. Her quilt, a jar of preserves, her father's tools. By the end of the week, her shawl hung beside his coat. Her garden spade leaned against his saddle. No one said the word move, but everything about the place said it for them. The house changed quietly. There was laughter now, small, careful at first, then freer. She caught him humming once while fixing a latch, and when she teased him for it, he laughed too, the sound deep and warm. He built her a new fence not to mark boundaries, but to hold the roses she planted. One evening, when the light fell golden through the windows, she found him standing by the hearth, holding something in his hand, a small wooden box. What's that? She asked, wiping her hands on her apron. He turned, a flicker of nervousness in his eyes she had never seen before. Something I should have given you from the start. She stepped closer as he opened the box. Inside lay a simple silver ring, slightly uneven, clearly handmade. I've asked you before, he said softly, with papers and contracts and everything that made it wrong. This time there's nothing but this. He took her hand, his fingers trembling slightly. Will you be my wife, not in name, not in law, but in every sunrise after this one? Her breath caught. She looked down at the ring, then up at him, the man who had broken her heart, and then learned how to hold it right. She nodded, eyes glistening. Yes, she whispered. In every sunrise. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It wasn't perfect, but it fit, just like them. That night, they sat on the porch roof, legs dangling over the edge, watching the fields stretch endless under the moon. The house behind them was quiet, warm, alive. Marin leaned her head on his shoulder, her fingers tracing the edge of his sleeve. I asked you not to take my home, she murmured. He turned toward her, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. Turns out you were mine all along. The wind moved through the wheat, whispering their story to the dark. And for the first time in years, the land no longer felt like something they had to fight for. It felt like something that had chosen them both.